Not when I signed the papers. Not when my daughter hugged me in the kitchen and said, "Mom, this just makes everything simpler." Not even when my son-in-law shook my hand with that firm, practiced grip of his and said, "You won't have to worry about a thing." I didn't cry then. I cried 6 months later, standing in the parking lot of a Walgreens, staring at a declined transaction receipt for $14.87, a bottle of aspirin and a bar of Dove soap. I sat in my car for a long time after that. The engine was off. The receipt was still in my hand. Outside, a woman was loading groceries into a minivan, a toddler on her hip, and everything looked so ordinary that I almost convinced myself I had made a mistake. Maybe I'd used the wrong card, maybe the machine had a glitch. But I think I had known for a while, my name is not important. What matters is that I am 67 years old. I live in a house in Asheville, North Carolina that my husband Chester and I bought in 1989 for less than what a used car costs now. And until 18 months ago, I had never once in my adult life worried about money. Not because we were rich, we weren't, but because Chester was careful, and I learned from him. And when he died 4 years ago, he left me in a position that most women my age would consider fortunate. The house was paid off. There was a savings account, a modest investment portfolio, a life insurance payout that I had barely touched. Chester used to say, "Evelyn, when I'm gone, you'll be fine." He said it the way people say things they mean completely. He was right. I was fine, until I wasn't. My daughter had always been the capable one. That was how I thought of her. Capable. She had a head for logistics, for spreadsheets, for getting things done. When Chester was sick, she organized his medication schedule in a color-coded binder. When he died, she handled the funeral home, the obituaries, the casseroles from neighbors. She did it all without being asked, and I was grateful, and I told her so, and I think that gratitude became something I reached for automatically, like a reflex I'd forgotten I could control. Her husband, my son-in-law, worked in finance. He had an answer for everything. When he talked about money, interest rates, tax strategy, liquidity, he used words that made me feel like a child who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. I never liked that feeling. I never said so. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, a boy and a girl, 9 and 11 years old. I adore them. That matters, for what comes later. It started the October after Chester's second death anniversary. My daughter came to visit alone. Her husband was traveling for work, she said, and we had a quiet dinner. And afterward, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a look on her face I recognized. It was the look she got when she was about to tell me something she had already decided. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about your finances." I told her I hadn't been thinking about them much, which was the truth. Chester had set everything up cleanly. The bills came out automatically. I kept a checkbook. It wasn't complicated. "That's the thing," she said. "It doesn't have to be complicated, but it should be managed, actively managed. Dad did a good job setting things up, but markets change, tax laws change. You're leaving money on the table." I asked her what she meant. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document, a durable power of attorney for finances, already prepared. I looked at the date in the upper corner. It had been drafted 2 weeks earlier. "I just want to make sure you're protected," she said. "If something happened to you, a fall, a stroke, anything, right now there's no one who can step in quickly. This just gives me the ability to act on your behalf if you need it." "Wouldn't it be easier," she said, "if everything was coordinated? Wouldn't it make more sense for someone who understood these things to keep an eye on the accounts? Wasn't this just responsible planning?" She made it sound like doing nothing was the reckless choice. I looked at the document for a long time. I thought about Chester, and how he had always been the one to read the fine print, and how I had trusted him to do it, and how that trust had been earned over 41 years. I thought about my daughter, who had organized the medication binder, who had called the funeral home, who had stayed on the phone with me until 2 in the morning the night after the burial. I signed. Nothing changed right away. That is the thing I want people to understand. There was no dramatic shift, no sudden strangeness. My daughter called on Sundays, the same as always. She brought the grandchildren over in November, and we raked leaves and made chili and watched a movie, and everything felt normal. The first thing I noticed was small. In December, I went to order a new set of checks from the bank. I was running low, and the woman at the counter looked at my account and said there was a notation on file. Any account changes needed to be coordinated with my authorized representative. I said I just wanted checks. She looked uncomfortable. She said she'd need to reach out to the person listed on the account before she could make any changes. I drove home without the checks. I told myself there was probably an explanation, a clerical mix-up, something my daughter had set up to protect against fraud. I sent her a text. She called back the next day. She'd been in meetings, and she said, "Oh, that must be from when she'd added herself to the account. She'd meant to tell me. She'd been so busy. She'd take care of the checks herself. She'd just mail them to me." The checks arrived 3 weeks later. I put them in the drawer and didn't think about it again. January, February. I noticed the balance in my checking account looked lower than I expected, but I had sent money to my younger sister for a medical bill in the fall, and I assumed I'd miscalculated. I had never been as sharp with numbers as Chester. I didn't obsess over it. In March, I went to buy a birthday gift for my grandson, a book he'd asked for and a small telescope, because he had become interested in stars. The total came to just over $200. My card was declined. I thought it was a mistake. I went to the ATM in the lobby, I put in my card, and asked for the balance. The number on the screen did not make sense to me at first. I stood there reading it twice, 3 times. The balance in my savings account. The account Chester had spent 20 years building was $412. I did not call my daughter from the bank. I want you to understand that. I stood at that ATM for I don't know how long, and I made myself breathe, and I took my card out, and I walked to my car, and I sat down, and I put my hands in my lap. Chester had a habit, when something went wrong, of getting very quiet. Not cold, just quiet. He said, thinking out loud was how people made bad situations worse. He used to say, you can be upset, and you can still be smart. Those are not mutually exclusive. I thought about Chester. Then I called someone else. His name is not important either, but I will say, he was Chester's attorney for 30 years, and he had written our wills, and he had handled our estate planning. And when Chester died, he had been one of the people who stood at the graveside. He sent me a Christmas card every year. He did not have a financial interest in my situation. I told him what I'd seen. The balance, the PO, the checks. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come in tomorrow morning." I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bedroom. Chester and I had shared for 31 years. The same headboard, the same lamp on his side that I still didn't move. And I stared at the ceiling and thought about the binder. The color-coded binder she'd made for his medications. I had thought of it as love. I had thought of it as my daughter showing up, showing love in the language of organization and action. But love doesn't draft a power of attorney 2 weeks before the conversation. Love doesn't add itself to your accounts without mentioning it. Love doesn't make the teller look uncomfortable when you ask for checks. He didn't see himself as a thief, Chester's attorney told me later. He was quoting something he'd read, I think, but it landed on me like something I already knew. She didn't see herself as a thief either. She saw me as something that would always be there. A house, a savings account. A mother who would be grateful, who would sign what was put in front of her, who didn't fully understand and therefore couldn't fully object. She wasn't wrong about some of that. But she had miscalculated something important. Chester's attorney pulled the transaction history. It took him 2 days to compile a picture that I could look at clearly, because he wanted to be sure before he told me anything. There had been 18 months of transfers. Small at first. 2,000 here, 3,000 there, always to an account I didn't recognize. Then larger, then more frequent. A pattern that started cautiously and grew comfortable. The last 6 months had been the worst. $60,000 moved in 4 transactions, spread across different weeks, so nothing triggered an automatic alert. There was a home renovation my son-in-law had told me they were doing, a kitchen update. He'd mentioned it in passing. There was a car lease. There were what appeared to be investment account contributions in my son-in-law's name. The POA gave my daughter the authority to do all of it. Everything she'd done was, on paper, technically legal. That was the part that made my chest hurt in a way that was different from grief. Grief, I knew. Grief had a shape. This was something else. It felt like standing in a room where the walls looked fine but the foundation had been eaten through. Chester's attorney did not tell me to call the police. He told me first to call a different attorney, an elder law specialist, and he gave me a name and said he would make the introduction personally. I met with her the following week. She was younger than I expected, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a direct way of speaking that I found immediately reassuring. She looked at the transaction history for a long time. Then she looked at me. "You understand," she said, "that even with a a fiduciary is required to act in your interest, not their own." I said I understood. "This is not that," she said. "No," I said, "it was not." My daughter called on Sunday the way she always did. By then it had been 3 weeks since I'd been to the bank, 2.5 weeks since I'd met with Chester's attorney, 1 week since I'd retained the elder law attorney. I had not called my daughter. I had not changed my voice. I had not done anything differently. Chester always said, "Don't tip your hand before you know what cards you're holding." I was still learning what cards I was holding. She asked how I was feeling. I said fine, a little tired. She asked if I needed anything. I said I couldn't think of anything. She mentioned the children. Her son had a school presentation coming up. Her daughter had lost a tooth. Ordinary things. The kind of things that used to make Sundays feel full. I said all the right words. I asked the right questions. I hung up and sat in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I thought about the tooth. The lost tooth. I had been there when my daughter lost her first tooth. I had put the dollar under her pillow. I had watched her sleep. I sat with that for a while, and then I put the phone down and went to my desk. Here is what I did not do. I did not cry on the phone with her. I did not send an angry email. I did not tell my grandchildren anything was wrong. I did not call my younger sister and discuss it, because my sister would have called my daughter immediately and the conversation would have unraveled before it was ready. I did not tell anyone except the attorneys and, eventually, my neighbor Doris, who had known Chester and me for 20 years and who was the kind of woman who could hold a confidence like ballast. Here is what I did. I worked with the elder law attorney to revoke the power of attorney. The process was not as fast as I wanted. There were forms. There were notifications that had to be served. There were steps in the right order because doing things out of order, I was told, could complicate recovery of the funds. I opened a new account at a different bank, in my name only, and I transferred what remained of the savings, the $400 plus a CD that had not yet come due, which my daughter had apparently not located, into it. I changed the deed notification settings on my house so that any transfer or lien attempt would require in-person verification with me present. I updated my will, and then I waited. My son-in-law called me on a Tuesday. He did not usually call me. Sunday calls were my daughter's, and even those were recent in the way that attention sometimes arrives when someone wants to stay close to something they're managing. He asked, casually, how I was enjoying the spring weather. He mentioned their kitchen renovation was almost finished. I'd have to come see it. He said the kids had been asking about me. He asked, toward the end, whether I had given any thought to consolidating my other accounts. He'd been talking to some colleagues, he said, and there were some really attractive options for someone in my position. If I wanted, he could put together some information. I'd love to see it, I said. He said he'd send something over. He never did. I think, somewhere in that conversation, he heard something in my voice. Or didn't hear something he expected. The meeting happened on a Thursday in April. My daughter had called and asked if she could come by. She wanted to drop off some things, seedlings from her garden, because I'd mentioned wanting to start tomatoes this year. She came in with a flat of seedlings and set them on the porch table, and we sat down with iced tea. She looked well. She'd had her hair done recently. She was wearing a linen jacket I'd never seen before. We talked about the children for a while. We talked about the weather. And then she said, lightly, "The way you say things you've been rehearsing," that she'd been meaning to look at my accounts with me. It had been a few months. She just wanted to make sure everything was in order. Actually, I said, I've made some changes. She looked up from her tea. I told her I had revoked the power of attorney. I said it the way Chester would have said it, quietly, without apology, without elaboration, just the fact. The color shifted in her face. It was subtle. She had always been better than most people at keeping her face still. But I saw it. I had been watching her face since before she could talk. "Mom," she said, "why would you do that?" "Because I looked at the accounts," I said. She started to say something about coordination, about the complexity of finances, about how much she had been handling on my behalf. I let her finish. Then I said, "I spoke with an attorney." That was when she cried. Not before. Not in the way someone cries when they're hurt. In the way someone cries when a door they thought was still open has been quietly closed. She pressed her hand over her mouth and looked out toward the yard, at Chester's old apple tree, the one that still bloomed every spring no matter what. I watched her. I didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say. The elder law attorney had advised me to let the legal process do the speaking. I was not there to wound her. I was not there to perform. I was there because this was my home and she had come to it, and I was not going to leave. She gathered herself after a few minutes. She asked if there was anything she could do. I thought about that. I thought about the binder, the phone calls, the graveside, the way she'd made the children wave to me from the back seat of the car every single time they pulled out of my driveway, as if she'd taught them to, as if she'd wanted me to see it. I don't know, I said. She left without the seedlings. I planted them myself the following Saturday. 6 tomato plants along the south fence, where Chester always said the light was best. The soil was dark and cool, and the morning was quiet, and I worked until my back asked me to stop, and then I sat on the back steps with a glass of water and looked at what I'd done. The garden didn't know anything had happened. The apple tree was blooming. A cardinal was somewhere in the branches, and I could hear it but not see it, and I stayed still and waited, because that is the only way you can. There are things I will have to figure out still. The legal process is not finished. I do not know what it will cost, in money or in other ways. I do not know what happens to Sundays now, but I know this. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. The attorney's number is in my phone, and I know how to use it. I have a neighbor who checks on me, and a cardinal in an apple tree, and 6 tomato plants that have nothing to do with anyone else. Chester used to say that trust, once it's gone, doesn't leave a clean hole. It leaves something jagged. He was right about that too. But I am still here, and the garden needed tending, so I tend it.